Chairman Thompson.
Prefatory question directed to all three members of the panel, if I might. From the beginning of our history as a nation, whenever the nation has been the subject of attack or the subject of threat or engaged in actual warfare, we have faced enemy forces from states across fixed battle lines in the United States or in other parts of the world. And we have protected ourselves. Now we have an enemy, as I understand it, that can operate in any part of the world, which draws support of one kind or another from hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of people, willing to die and willing to be very patient and conduct operations perhaps for the rest of history. We at the same time have a country that is big, open, free, and in many respects unguardable, unprotectable. And our interests abroad are so far flung that the same might be said of those facilities and forces as well. How in the world do we ever expect to win this war? And if the war is not winnable in the traditional sense, how do we contain or checkmate this enemy? Because I think when this is all over, that's still the fundamental question, and I'd appreciate the views of all three of you on that.
Governor, I think you raise a very interesting point, and I would add just one more.
The red button has to be up.
Yes, sir. I would just add one more element to what you described, and that is that Al-Qaeda is a very innovative, creative organization. It is constantly refining its tactics to circumvent the security precautions that we put in place. And so it is constantly evolving. It is very agile tactically.
President Clinton described them to us as entrepreneurial.
I think that's probably an excellent description. And it gets back to an issue that I think Senator Kerry raised, which is, as we gain greater understanding about Al-Qaeda's tactics and specific plots, and we try to illuminate the networks that are behind them so that we can take them down, which is ultimately the only way we can be sure we stop attacks. It is very important to take that information that is gained in clandestine channels and to, as rapidly as possible, downgrade it so that it is disseminable to law enforcement, non-traditional intelligence customers, people who can take it and act on it in order to secure the country. And that is a major focus of CTC and the intelligence community, now day in and day out, to take classified information and push it to first-line defenders, both here and overseas.
If I understand the question correctly, you're sort of getting at how do we combat this broader jihadist movement.
Right.
There are 2 points I think I'd like to make. First of all, there is a segment of the Muslim community that support bin Laden, adhere to his vision, believe in what he stands for, who also believe that they have an individual duty to the Muslim community to pursue violent jihad. So those folks, I'm not sure there's much we can do to combat that type of sentiment, that type of belief. In other words, I don't think we can bring them down from whatever cliff they're standing on with those beliefs. I think what we ought to do is, I think that there's a better chance for success by focusing on those folks who have not made that transformation, who believe that there might be other ways to serve their communities to improve their positions, to achieve their objectives, but not through violence. And I think what would be useful for the United States is to work with governments in the Arab part of the world and Muslim governments to find ways for those segments of the population to find alternative means of channeling their sentiments through constructive, nonviolent activities. What those might be, I don't know. But I think that's the type of approach we need to go to pursue. If by doing that we would reduce, I think, the pool of potential recruits of future terrorists.
But what's happening in Iraq today, doesn't that give you pause about how nonviolent Muslims will respond to the presence in their midst of people willing to fight and die and kill them? When Iraqi insurgents can blow up oil facilities at will, blow up electricity at will, car bomb at will, attack contractors and U.S. troops at will, what does that say about the ability of al-Qaeda-like organizations to inflict damage within the Muslim community at large?
Well, if I were in their position, I would be concerned by what I would see going on around me in a country like Iraq. I don't know what I would say.
Pat?
Morning, Governor. And I think that the sad answer is that I think we all recognize there's no silver bullet. There's no single organizational fix that's going to, that we can all walk out and say that we're now 100% safe. So I think we have to look at the short term and the long term, recognizing that the short term itself is a long process. When people surveil 5 years ahead of time or think about plans, half a decade before they carry them out, the short term is a number of years. And there we have to focus on making sure we do the best job to gather intelligence on what is being planned by getting human source intelligence, working with our allies, but also recognizing the fundamental problem we have at our borders. Every time someone shows up at our border, even if they have a legitimate document, immigration people are asked to call upon to decide whether this person's coming here legitimately to try to make their life better or whether they're coming here to kill us. And we can't keep drugs out of the country despite all our efforts. We still get drugs coming in here, and the contraband that people are bringing is their minds. They've decided they want to kill us, and they're willing to die to do it. And we don't have a magic formula that stops them at the border and says, this person goes to an x-ray machine, and we figured out why they're really coming here. We can't turn everyone away. We want to make sure that we don't turn away the good people coming to our shores. We want to keep the bad people out. And so we've got to do deal with that vexing problem that I just don't know what the answer is, that we have someone making a decision in 2 minutes at a border as to what to do. We have to look at that issue. We have to gather information about what people are doing, about operations they're planning, work with human sources, work with other countries. The long-term solution is to win the hearts and minds, but we're not going to win the hearts and minds of the people who are already sworn to kill us. They're lost to us. They want to kill us. What we have to do is win the hearts and minds of people who could be allies and work with us. We want to win the hearts and minds of people before they go over to al-Qaeda's ideology. We want to win the hearts and minds of people who may be in the community, who may see something that may alert to them and trust us enough to bring the information forward. But it's not easy, and it's going to take a long time.
Debbie?
Pat touched on some of the themes I was thinking about in response to your question. Then in many ways, what we need to do at the FBI street agent level is to continue what we've always done, and that is to pursue all the information that we do get and pursue that information to its logical end, to corroborate what we get or wash out what washes out, to continue to develop sources, human sources, whether we can penetrate them into groups or whether they're people who are eyes and ears, and that includes members of the public, to continue to be a presence in our respective cities and towns, to be out there, to give someone pause if maybe they're thinking of doing something against us, but they see a car that looks like a federal car drive by, or they know that agents have been out in the neighborhood, that they might think twice. And then to continue to ensure that the information that we do develop is passed up and passed out. The sad reality for us is that we have to be 100% on the ball, no mistakes, and they only have to get by once. And that's the war we're up against.
In our hearings and in the commentary of press and public officials, there is a quick and ready assumption sometimes that Al-Qaeda may be still fighting the last war, trying to replicate September 11th in some analogous fashion, that New York City may be a special target to the exclusion of the rest of the country, that we need to guard our airlines, that the goal of Al-Qaeda is to aim for mass casualties. Are you concerned that within this context, law enforcement, the press, the public, and the policymakers are overlooking other avenues of attack which may bring as devastating or even more devastating results to the United States that would be fundamentally much easier? Just for example, if 10 Al-Qaeda operatives went into 10 different supermarkets across the country at the same time in 10 large cities, or even 5 large cities and 5 small towns, and walked over to the produce counter where food is open and uncovered and unprotected, and managed to insert poisons on the food, and with the result that people in those 10 communities died all at the same time, and then they took public credit for this. You wouldn't have mass casualties, but you'd have mass terror, because people would assume that nothing in the food supply outside of a can or a bottle was safe. And the enormous disruption to the American economy that would result would be staggering. Are we contemplating the possibilities of attack like this? What are we doing to prevent them? And do you think there's a preoccupation with what Al-Qaeda has done in the past, or a preoccupation with things that are like what Al-Qaeda has done in the past, to the detriment of thinking as creatively as these people can think?
Sir, I think we have to think on both levels. Certainly, I think the Attorney General and Director Mueller and Secretary Ridge have outlined that America still does face a very serious threat of spectacular attack from Al-Qaeda in the coming months, that it's bin Laden and the few resources he may still have at his disposal in South Asia, that he is focusing on a spectacular attack here in the U.S. But I think, as we've seen in other places around the world, as we harden certain targets, Al-Qaeda is willing to move down the food chain to go after softer targets. I think it's very important. One of the understandings I think we have come to is that when Al-Qaeda and bin Laden look at America, they are looking for targets that will be instantly recognizable in the Muslim world. And that is why you saw a fascination with the Capitol and the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. And I think that's an enduring fascination on their part when it comes to spectacular attacks. But I think you also correctly point out that there are a number of other ways to create spectacular events. And I think that's why we remain so concerned about Al-Qaeda's fascination with CBRN weapons. Because those types of weapons, if used, no matter what the casualty count, could produce the ripple effects that would be spectacular.
Well, see, it seems to me that the World Trade Towers, in one sense, and this is not a pun, was a twofer. It provided a spectacular, recognizable example to the Muslim community worldwide, but it also brought together American fears of a shared experience that may now be dangerous, like flying in an airplane, right? So wouldn't Al-Qaeda logically try to think about things that bind Americans together, so that, unlike perhaps what happened in New York, where the rest of the country felt a great tragic loss for the people of New York, but didn't feel exactly a current physical danger, because New York was here and the rest of the country was here, and the effects clearly wore off after time. But if there was a common experience that Americans share, like buying food at a store, that was made to appear to be unsafe, you'd create worse panic in the country than you would with a physical attack in 1 or 2 locations. Am I correct about that?
Yes, sir, and I believe there was an individual indicted just the other day, or publicly discussed by the Attorney General, who was looking at shopping malls.
Right.
So I think you're absolutely correct in terms of, again, being innovative and adapting their tactics to hit us in new ways.
Why do you suppose it is that we've not been attacked since September 11th in the U.S.? Any ideas? Is this beyond public discussion? If so, just tell me and I'll go to another question.
No, sir. I mean, it's a question we ask ourselves constantly. I think that when it comes to bin Laden and the plots that he's contemplating, Al-Qaeda still comes down on how can we do something spectacular like 9/11. And they are going to be patient, and they're going to wait until they believe they can be successful before they conduct that attack.
Without talking about details, have we prevented any attacks within the United States since 9/11?
Yes, sir. I think we've probably prevented a few aviation attacks against both the East and West Coast. That doesn't mean that we've totally stopped that particular threat. There are operatives involved in those plots that we still cannot account for. And it is only safe to assume that they are still out there. They are still thinking about ways to conduct those attacks, or that they might move on to some other Al-Qaeda plot against the homeland.
Thank you.